Hey, Ben here again from Performer Magazine with another special delivery, checking out some of the stuff we got in the office for review. Today we're taking a look at the ARP Odyssey Reissue from our friends at KORG. Alright, let's take a look. So this is the new Odyssey, and if you've ever used one of the old Odysseys, or a couple updates this time around, KORG is obviously reissuing this classic synth from the 70s. This particular one that we have is modeled after Rev 3, it's called, which is the ubiquitous orange and black color scheme. There's also the white one, which is, I believe, Rev 1, and the kind of black and gold version, which was Rev 2. As far as the reissues go, they're all the same. The major differences you'll find between these and the models from the 70s, the sound for me is pretty indistinguishable. Your results may vary, but it sounds exactly the same. This is actually the instrument that I first learned synthesis on, not this one, the original. The main difference is here, this is about 15% smaller than the original Odysseys from the 70s, which is great because mine never fit properly on a work desk, and this does. 15% doesn't seem like a huge amount, but it actually is pretty noticeable. The keys are smaller, which may or may not be to your tastes. I find it fine for my applications. I'm not a concert pianist, so when I'm playing a synthesizer, I can adapt pretty easily. On the back panel, I won't flip it over because it's not that exciting, but you do have headphone out, a couple CVs, and now MIDI, which is great because they didn't have that back then. Although I will mention, I was fairly disappointed with the MIDI implementation here. It's basically just note on, note off. Nothing all that special, doesn't really transmit anything else. None of these buttons or sliders will transmit or receive MIDI CC data, which is kind of a bummer because in this price range you could get a Moog Subfatty, which does. It's an amazing MIDI controller, and this just falls flat there. So that's kind of my one big complaint, is the MIDI implementation. It's pretty lame. Note on, note off doesn't really do you a whole lot of good these days unless you're doing something super simple. But the other really cool thing that I do love on this is you get all three filter revisions. Revision 1, 2, and 3. One of them supposedly, or maybe not supposedly, infringed on the Moog 4-pole ladder filter. I'm not going to go into that. I personally like the third filter, so that's kind of what I keep it on. If you've never used an Odyssey before, you're gonna look at this and be like, what is this? If you're used to like a Moog or something similar where there's knobs and a pitch wheel and a mod wheel, this may be unfamiliar territory. Like I said, this is the instrument that I first learned on, so I know how to use it, but consult a manual if you've never used one before, because it is worth learning. What I think of it as is sort of a mixing console connected to a synth engine connected to a keyboard controller. You've got 3 octaves here. These are those mini keys, which some people may or may not be into. I feel the action is pretty decent. That's a wacky sound, but the touch is fine. There's no aftertouch or anything like that, but keys are fairly sensitive. Not as weighted as the Subfatty, which I would have liked, but again, it is what it is. It's a recreation of a classic machine, so they're doing that justice. Let's start from left to right. Like I said, it is kind of like a mixer with a synth engine. So when you look at VCO1 and VCO2 and you don't see your waveform selector or any sort of level control, that's where you sort of head to the audio mixer. I know a lot of people who are starting out are like, all right, I'm in my oscillator 1. How do I pick my waveform? How do I control my levels? Well, that's over here. So once you get over some of the little quirks, it's a really fantastic machine. It's been called kind of the first punk synthesizer. I don't know if I buy that, but like I said, once you get a handle on it, it's pretty awesome. And this recreation, probably the reason you're watching this video, is you're asking, okay, how good is it compared to one of the originals? For me, indistinguishable is a term that I've used probably 1,000 times when describing it to people, because it is. The sound is there, and that was the key concern that I had. Key concern that a lot of people had was, all right, you can fit it in a smaller box. That's great. We got modern components and everything. Is it going to sound like the originals? Because the originals are going for about $2-3 on eBay and Reverb and Craigslist, and most of those have to be cleaned up. A lot of broken keys. One of the nice things about this enclosure, this case, they've actually updated that a little bit. So you can see here, the case actually extends underneath the keys, whereas on the original it didn't. So if you had a real ham-fisted approach like me, that's why you see some broken keys. But yeah, the sound is there. The filter is great. It's not a Moog filter, not meant to be. It's got a different flavor to it. You know, but going left to right, you've got noise generator. You've got the wacky proportional pitch control, which you may or may not like. I like it because it's kind of organic. It's not perfect. You don't necessarily always go, you know, to the pitch wheel, bend it all the way up and know that you're going to get 2 semitones or whatever you have it mapped to. It's a little more organic than that. So if you're playing a note, what you need to do is kind of wiggle this a little bit with your thumb. So let me... Probably can't hear that. So it's kind of interesting. You've got your octave transposer here. This actually goes up 2 and down 2. Back in the middle. You've got your glide here, your portamento. I like it kind of at this first notch. You can go real wacky like this. But I like a little bit to taste, so I keep it down low. You've got your tuning adjustments here on each oscillator, so you can kind of detune them a little bit if you want to fatten up the sound. You can also sync them to each other, which is awesome. Down here you've got your FM modulation, your pulse width rate, so you can get that square wave really, really, really thin or, you know, normal spaced, however you choose. LFO you can assign here. You can do sine wave or square wave. You can choose between the sample and hold and your ADSR. Similarly over here, you know, you can choose how you want to affect pulse width. So you've got a lot of modulation options here, and here is obviously where you're going to set your LFO frequency. So that rate that's controlling all of that right up there. You got your sample and hold mixer, which is kind of cool. You know, that makes all those weird, like, robotic beep boop 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 beep boop 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 boop, those types of sounds. You've got your filter here, so you've got your cutoff. Again, the anti-Moog, you don't have that big giant knob to turn. You've got your slider. So wherever you think there's supposed to be a knob, there's a slider. And then you've got your resonance here. You can self-oscillate if you want to. It actually labels it there. You can get that really high-pitched type of sound. And again, your filter selection is here, so you can choose type 1, 2, 3. Like I said, I like 3. Kind of matches the color scheme. Your audio mixer. So here's where you're actually going to adjust your levels and everything. Here's your noise and your ring modulator. Ring modulation, I've got that all the way down. I'm not a huge fan of noise unless I'm doing percussive type effects. VCO1, VCO2, you can have them both down, so you have no audio. You can have them both up, or you can mix to taste. And here, again, is where you're going to select your waveforms. You would think that you're somewhat limited here because you've only got square and sawtooth, but, you know, you can actually get a pretty decent array of sounds by, you know, mixing, matching, adjusting levels, adjusting modulation, and, you know, pulse width modulation, and, you know, all that sort of good stuff with your LFO. Your keyboard CV or your sample and hold mix or pedal, you can choose that on and off. Your sample and hold or LFO, and then you can choose on the filter whether to have it affected by an ADSR or just an AR, just amplitude and release. So, I mean attack and release, excuse me. So you've got an AR section here, attack and release, and you've got a separate ADSR envelope generator down here with your standard attack, decay, sustain, release. And on your output, you can actually choose which one you want to, attack and release or the full ADSR. So you can really shape the sound both through the filter and essentially what is the volume and how you're having those controlled either by attack and release or a full ADSR, which is kind of neat. You know, you don't get that on a lot of different synths. You've got your high pass filter cutoff frequency here, and then you have, this is new actually, a drive. So you can add a little grit to it on off right there. You've got your LFO and repeat stuff here, so you can hold down and have that keep going and going and going and going, and layer stuff on top of it, however you like. You can have it triggered singularly. But yeah, overall, really, really awesome reproduction. I can't say enough great things about it. I do wish the MIDI was better, but that's kind of a minor complaint because there was no MIDI back then anyway. So the fact that it's even on this board in any capacity, even though it's just kind of note on, note off, is sort of a plus. Sort of. But that's the Odyssey. Quick take, love it. Sounds killer. It sounds like the original. It's much smaller, which is great, and at a price point that is really pretty amazing if you don't want to fork over the cash for a vintage one. These run about $7.99. That's with case, and obviously most online retailers will throw in free shipping. So if you're looking at it, we give it a super big thumbs up, and we actually picked it as our best reissue under $1,000. So editor's seal of approval. There's my Jaco Pastorius broken thumb, and that's about it. So hope you enjoy, and we'll see you next time.